I remember every single detail of that day, from the crispness of the morning air to the crushing weight of the evening. At 68 years old, I had devoted my life to a quiet, unwavering devotion, the kind that becomes a steady undercurrent in a long marriage. George, my husband of 42 years, was turning 70, a milestone I had planned to commemorate with an intimate, joyful celebration. The kitchen was my sanctuary, filled with the aroma of the five-cheese lasagna that was his favorite, a recipe I had perfected over 4 decades. My hands, still capable despite their age, kneaded the pasta dough with a rhythm I knew by heart, a rhythm that was a symphony of our life together. The house was spotless, a testament to the care I had always poured into our home, into our shared existence. I had arranged the flowers myself, a vibrant bouquet of his favorites, sunflowers and irises, placed on the polished oak table. Every detail was a whispered promise of our enduring bond, a tribute to the man I thought I knew better than anyone. The guest list was small, comprised of our 2 children, Sarah and David, their spouses, and our 3 beautiful grandchildren. It was meant to be a simple affair, a peaceful gathering that would allow us to reflect on the blessings of our life. As the final touch, I had also extended a spontaneous invitation to Jessica, our new neighbor from the apartment across the hall. Jessica was a brilliant, ambitious young woman in her late 20s, a recent hire at the global consulting firm where I had worked for many years before my retirement. I had been her informal mentor, drawn to her fierce intelligence and her quiet determination. She had seemed a little lost in the hustle of city life, and I thought a simple dinner with my family might make her feel a little more at home. It was a simple act of kindness, a gesture of maternal warmth that I felt was my duty as her elder. I wanted to show her that a life of ambition and a life of family could be intertwined. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the doorbell rang. It was Sarah and her family, her 2 boys immediately running to hug me. They were a whirlwind of youthful energy, and their presence filled our home with laughter. David and his wife arrived shortly after, and the house, once so quiet, was alive with the familiar chaos of family. Jessica arrived last, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress. She brought a bottle of wine, and I could not help but feel a sense of pride in her. She was a professional, but she had a kindness in her eyes that reminded me of my own younger self. The dinner was, by all accounts, a success. The lasagna was devoured, the wine was praised, and the conversation flowed with a comfortable ease. We reminisced about old family trips, shared stories about the grandchildren, and laughed at George's old jokes. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. Everyone, that is, except for George. I noticed his distance immediately. He was not his usual jovial self. His eyes, which I had known for over 40 years, were not truly present. He answered questions in short, clipped sentences. He did not eat much of his lasagna. And most disturbingly, his attention was not on the family, but on Jessica. He kept looking at her with an intensity that was unsettling. I dismissed it at first as a passing curiosity. Perhaps he was simply impressed by her youth and her intellect. I told myself it was harmless, a simple fascination with a new person. But as the evening wore on, the glances became more frequent, more lingering. A cold dread, a feeling I had not felt since my youth, began to settle in the pit of my stomach. My own laughter felt hollow, a forced performance to keep the night from unraveling. The evening ended as quickly as it began. The children said their goodbyes, the grandchildren giving me quick hugs and kisses. I felt a profound sense of relief as the front door closed, as if I had held my breath for the entire evening. Jessica lingered for a moment, thanking us for the dinner, her eyes a little too bright. I told her it was a pleasure, and I meant it. What I did not know was that the real pleasure was still to come for her, and the real pain was still to come for me. As I began to clear the plates, a quiet hum of the dishwasher was the only sound in the house. George stood in the living room, staring out the window. His back was to me, but I could feel the coldness emanating from him. I approached him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "George," I said, my voice soft, "was everything all right tonight? You seemed a little quiet." He turned to face me, and in his eyes, there was a complete and utter blankness. He did not see me. He saw a stranger, a ghost from a past life he was eager to shed. "Martha," he said, and his voice was devoid of any warmth, any emotion. It was the sound of a verdict being delivered. "We need to talk." My heart, which had been so full of love and pride just hours before, plummeted. It was not a sudden fall, but a slow, agonizing descent. The words he spoke next did not sound like they belonged to him. They were the cold, calculated phrases of a man who had rehearsed this moment, who had planned this departure with a precision that was more terrifying than any outburst. "I am leaving you, Martha," he said, and he said it without a single tremor in his voice. "I have not been happy for a long time. I feel trapped here. I need to find myself again." The world seemed to stop. The dishwasher hummed on, oblivious to the fact that my life was being dismantled, one cold, unfeeling word at a time. The room, which I had filled with so much love, became a cage. The sunflowers on the table seemed to mock me with their cheerful yellow faces. I could not speak. My voice, which had once been so clear and full of life, was stuck in my throat, a dry, bitter lump. "And I am leaving with Jessica," he continued, and it was the sound of a final blow, a hammer falling on the glass of my reality. "She understands me. She has a fire, a passion for life that we have lost." My breath caught in my chest. The world spun around me, a dizzying kaleidoscope of pain and betrayal. Jessica. The young woman I had taken under my wing, the woman I had just fed a meal from my own hands. The woman I had invited into my home, into the very heart of my family. I had extended a hand of kindness, and she had taken it, not with gratitude, but with the cold, calculating cruelty of a viper. I finally found my voice, a weak, trembling whisper. "But why? Why her? Why now? We have a life, George. We have a family." He sighed, a sound of impatience, of a man who was burdened by the past, by the history we had built together. "That is the problem, Martha. The life we have is not enough for me anymore. You do not understand. You have become so, set in your ways. So old." The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. Old. The woman who had built a career, raised a family, and kept a home. The woman who had sacrificed her dreams for his. The word was a knife, and he twisted it with a cruel nonchalance. He saw me not as his wife, but as an obstacle, a relic of a life he no longer wanted. He left that night. He packed a single suitcase and left. As he walked out the door, he turned to me, his face a mask of cold resolve. "I have already taken my share of our money," he said. "It is in a separate account now. I will be in touch with a lawyer about the house." The front door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was more deafening than any scream could ever be. I stood there, alone in the wreckage of my birthday celebration. The smell of lasagna still hung in the air, a cruel, mocking reminder of the life that was, and the life that was no more. The house felt empty. My heart felt empty. My life felt empty. My world, which I had carefully constructed over 68 years, had been shattered by a man I thought I knew, a man who had proven to be a stranger. I sank into a chair, the tears finally coming, a hot, painful stream. I cried for the life I had lost. I cried for the man I had loved. I cried for the injustice of it all. It was not just a betrayal of a husband, it was a betrayal of my kindness, my trust, my generosity. I had offered friendship, and I had received a dagger in the back. The next morning, I awoke to the cold light of day. The house was exactly as it had been. The flowers were still on the table, their petals bright and cheerful. The dishes were in the dishwasher, waiting to be cleaned. Everything was the same, and yet everything was profoundly different. My life was now defined by an absence, a gaping wound where a marriage had once been. My phone buzzed. It was a text from George. "I am sorry, but I need to do this. I will contact you when I am settled." It was a message that was devoid of any remorse. It was a message that was cold, clinical, and completely without feeling. I threw my phone on the sofa, the screen a black void. The days that followed were a blur of grief and numbness. I ate little. I slept less. The silence in the house was a constant companion, a heavy blanket that smothered me. I would stand in the kitchen, and my hands would instinctively reach for the flour and sugar, a ritual that had been a part of my life for as long as I could remember. But I would stop, the realization of my solitude hitting me like a physical blow. The rituals of our life together were now a painful reminder of what I had lost. I had been a high-level executive for a top global firm for decades, but I had always been the quiet partner in our marriage. George had been the charmer, the life of the party, the one who took all the credit. I was the one who worked behind the scenes, who managed the finances, who made sure everything ran smoothly. My intelligence had always been a quiet force, a hidden strength that I had never needed to flaunt. I had thought it was a secret we shared, a bond of mutual respect. But now I saw that he had always underestimated me. He had always seen me as simply his wife, a woman who was good at making a home, a woman who was, in his words, old. He saw me as a relic, a piece of old furniture that was no longer useful. He did not see the woman who had built her own empire in the world of data and technology. He did not see the woman who was a master of her craft, who had trained others to see the world in a way they had never seen it before. He did not see the woman who had created and patented some of the most advanced security and data tracking software on the market. He did not see the woman who had a hidden world of power and influence. He simply saw an old woman. He did not know. He did not know that his new life, his new freedom, was built on a foundation of lies and deceit that I could see with a simple tap of my finger. I did not know what to do. My mind, so used to solving complex problems, was frozen. The first few weeks were an exercise in emotional survival. The public humiliation was swift and brutal. George, it seemed, had no shame. He began to post photos of himself and Jessica on social media, a digital life of adventure and youth that was meant to make me feel small. He tagged me in the photos, a blatant act of gaslighting, an attempt to make me a part of his new narrative. Living our best life, he would write. A fresh start is the best start. He would tag her as my inspiration and my one and only. He made sure the world saw him as a man reborn, a man who had been liberated from the chains of a long, boring marriage. I watched, numb with pain, as the public narrative of my life was rewritten without my consent. My friends, our old acquaintances, would call, their voices filled with a forced pity. "I am so sorry, Martha," they would say. "I cannot believe George would do this." But I knew what they were thinking. They were thinking what he wanted them to think. That I was the old, boring wife who had lost her spark, and he was the brave, adventurous man who had found his. I would thank them for their condolences, and I would hang up the phone, a hollow ache in my chest. The world was so quick to believe the story of the adventurous man and the tired wife. They did not know the truth. They did not know the man they praised was a thief and a liar, a man who had stolen my money and my dignity. And then, the family began to pull away. My children, my own flesh and blood, began to listen to their father's lies. George, I am sure, told them a version of the story where I was the villain, the emotionally distant wife who had driven him away. I would call Sarah, and she would say, "I am so sorry, Mom. I have been busy. I will call you back." She never did. I would text David, and his responses were short, clipped. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask if I needed anything. He simply said, "Dad is doing great. He seems so happy." He did not know that his father's happiness was built on a foundation of my pain. The worst moment was when my granddaughter, Emma, was having her 10th birthday party. My daughter-in-law, Susan, called me. "Mom," she said, and her voice was filled with a false sweetness. "I am so sorry, but we have decided that it would be best if you did not come to the party. The new living situation is complicated. We do not want to make things awkward. We will celebrate with you later." I knew what she meant. They did not want their friends to see their old grandmother, the one whose husband had just left her for a younger woman. They did not want to have to explain. I was a social inconvenience, a ghost from a past life that they were all trying to forget. I did not say anything. I simply hung up the phone, the sound of her voice a distant, mocking echo. My life was now a living testament to the cruelty of betrayal. I was not just alone. I was publicly humiliated, and I was abandoned by the very people who should have been my solace. My grief was not a private affair, it was a public spectacle. The pain was not just the pain of a broken heart, it was the pain of a broken trust, a broken family, a broken life. But through it all, there was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift inside of me. The numbness began to give way to something else. A cold, quiet anger began to simmer in my veins. My mind, which had been frozen in grief, began to thaw. I would sit in my living room, the quiet hum of the air conditioner the only sound, and I would think. I would remember. I would remember George's lies, his dismissive words, his cold, empty eyes. And I would think of Jessica, the young woman I had tried to help, the woman who had repaid my kindness with betrayal. I did not know what to do. But I knew that I could not simply let this go. I could not simply accept my new reality. I could not simply disappear. I was not a weak, old woman. I was a woman who had built a life with her hands, a life that had been stolen from her. In the late hours of the night, when the rest of the city was asleep, I would sit at my desk, a single lamp casting a warm glow on the polished oak. I would open my laptop, and the screen would come alive with a world of data and information that was known only to me. It was a world I had created. It was a world of algorithms and digital fingerprints. It was a world of truth. The screen was a dashboard, a complex web of information that was a testament to my life's work. I could see everything. I could see George's every purchase, every trip, every dinner. I could see the digital breadcrumbs he left behind, a trail of his new life, his new adventures. He thought he was free. He thought he was living a new life. He did not know that his new life was a digital cage, and I held the key. He did not know. He did not know that the woman he called old was watching his every move, his every breath. He thought he was clever. He did not know he was simply a pawn in a game he did not even know he was playing. The game, I knew, had just begun. And the rules of the game were about to change. The initial shock of George's departure gave way to a cold, calculated reality. The public spectacle he created was not a fleeting impulse, but a deliberate and sustained campaign. He was not merely leaving me, he was erasing me from his life and attempting to erase our shared history from the minds of those around us. My days became an endless cycle of silent observation. I felt as if I were a ghost haunting my own home, the one place where I should have felt safe. The silence was a constant companion, a heavy, suffocating presence that reminded me of my new status as a woman alone. My once vibrant home felt like a museum of a life that was now over, every piece of furniture, every photograph, a painful relic of a marriage that had been a lie. George, on the other hand, was living a loud, public, and aggressive life. He and Jessica were not subtle. They made a point of being seen everywhere, the local coffee shop we used to frequent on Sunday mornings, the public park where we would walk our old dog, even the family-owned grocery store where the cashier, Mrs. Henderson, knew our order by heart. Their happiness was a performance, a deliberate and cruel act of theater designed to humiliate me. Jessica, who had once seemed so quiet and respectful, now smiled at me with a sickening sweetness whenever our paths crossed. It was a smile of triumph, a smile that told me she had won. I would nod politely, a silent and dignified observer of my own humiliation. My heart, however, was a churning mass of pain and a growing, dangerous rage. I did not react. I did not scream. I did not confront them. I simply watched. The most painful part of this public betrayal was the effect it had on my family. George was a master manipulator. He had a way of twisting the truth, of making himself the victim. He would call our son David, his voice filled with a feigned sadness. "Your mother is taking this very hard," he would say. "I am worried about her. She is not herself." He would then post a photo of himself and Jessica on an exotic vacation, a stark contrast to the worried father he was pretending to be. He would complain to our daughter Sarah about how emotionally distant I had become, about how I had driven him to this. He told them he had offered me a fair settlement, and that I was the one who was holding things up, a lie that was a calculated attempt to turn my children against me. And it worked. My children, caught between a father who was playing the victim and a mother who was a silent observer, chose to believe the person who was the most vocal. They began to see me not as a person in pain, but as a problem to be managed. My calls were now met with a polite, but distant formality. "Mom, we are busy with the kids right now," Sarah would say. "We will call you later." But the call never came. David would send me a text, "We hope you are doing well. Dad says hi." They did not ask me if I was well. They did not ask me if I needed anything. They simply sent me a message that was a polite dismissal. They had made their choice. They had chosen to believe their father's narrative, the one where I was the problem, the one where he was the one who was set free. The ultimate betrayal came during the holiday season. It had been a tradition in our family to have Christmas dinner at our house. I had always loved this tradition. I would spend days preparing the meal, filling the house with the scent of pine and cinnamon. It was a time of warmth, of family, of love. This year, I had sent out the invitations, but I received no response. I was confused, hurt. I called Sarah. "Mom," she said, her voice filled with a feigned sorrow. "We are going to celebrate Christmas with Dad this year. He has invited us to a ski resort with Jessica. It is a little complicated. We do not want to make things awkward for you. We can celebrate on the day after." I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. They were not just choosing him over me. They were choosing his new life over the one we had built for decades. The tradition was now his. The family was now his. I was an afterthought, a woman who could be celebrated on the day after. I was a spare part, a ghost at the feast of my own family. My private pain was now a public and family-wide display of my abandonment. I watched them all leave for the ski resort on social media. I saw the photos of my grandchildren on the ski slopes with George and Jessica. I saw the photos of my son and daughter laughing with their father and his new young partner. I saw the photos of my grandchildren smiling, their faces full of joy. Their happiness was a dagger in my heart, a constant and painful reminder of all that I had lost. And through it all, I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not confront them. I simply watched. I was a silent spectator in the destruction of my own life. But while the world was watching the public spectacle, a quiet, almost imperceptible revolution was happening inside of me. The numbness had given way to something else entirely. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a dull ache. It was a sharp, focused point of light. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a blind, furious fire. It was a cold, calculated inferno. I began to find a strange, ironic peace in my solitude. The silence in the house, which had once been a source of pain, was now a source of strength. It was in the silence that I could think. It was in the silence that I could plan. I did not have to pretend anymore. I did not have to pretend that I was a happy wife, a doting mother. I could simply be. I began to see the world with a new clarity, a clarity that was sharpened by betrayal. I began to see George for who he really was, not the charming, confident man I had married, but a small, insecure man who was terrified of getting old. He was a man who had to steal a new life, because he did not have the courage to live the one he had. I began to see my children for who they were, not the loving, devoted people I had raised, but people who were easily swayed, people who were more concerned with appearances than with truth. And I began to see Jessica for who she really was. She was not a brilliant, ambitious young woman. She was a pawn, a willing accomplice in a cruel game. She had taken advantage of my kindness, my trust, my mentorship. She had used me to get to him. And she did not know that her every move was being tracked, every message she sent, every photo she took, every dollar she spent. She did not know that her new life was a digital cage, and I held the key. In the dead of night, I would sit at my desk, a single lamp casting a warm glow on the polished oak. My laptop was my companion, my only confidant. On the screen was a dashboard, a complex web of information that was a testament to my life's work. I was not simply an executive. I was a pioneer in the world of data intelligence. I had created a software that could track, analyze, and predict human behavior with an eerie precision. It was a software that was so powerful, so sophisticated, that it was not for sale to the public. It was for the eyes of a select few. It was for my eyes. The screen would glow with information. George and Jessica's every move was meticulously documented. I knew when they left for the ski resort. I knew what they ate for dinner. I knew how much they spent on lift tickets. I even knew the private messages they sent to each other, messages that were filled with a cold, calculated greed. They were not in love. They were in business. And the business was to take everything from me. I watched as they spent the money he had taken from our joint account. I watched as they planned their next trip, their next adventure. I watched as they laughed, oblivious to the fact that their laughter was a digital echo, a sound that I could hear and see and record. My heart was a stone, cold and heavy. But my mind was a razor. It was sharp. It was clear. I was not an old woman. I was a woman of immense power, a woman who had built her life with a quiet strength that had been underestimated by the man who was now trying to destroy me. I did not know what to do. But I knew that I could not simply let this go. I could not simply accept my new reality. I could not simply disappear. My children might have forgotten me. My husband might have betrayed me. The world might have dismissed me. But I was still here. And I was still watching. And I was still in control. The silence was my weapon. The data was my shield. And the rage was my fuel. The game, I knew, had just begun. And I was not going to lose. The public humiliation reached a fever pitch. George, emboldened by his perceived success in alienating me from our family and our friends, made his next move. The mail arrived one afternoon, and nestled between the junk flyers and the utility bills was a thick envelope with a law firm's name printed on the front. I opened it with a cold sense of dread. The documents inside were a formal demand. George was suing me for half of the equity in our home. He claimed the house was too expensive for me to maintain alone and that he needed his share of the assets to fund his new life with Jessica. The lawsuit was a public and brutal act, a calculated attempt to dismantle my life, to take everything from me, and to leave me with nothing. I sat at my kitchen table, the legal documents spread out before me like a verdict. The words swam before my eyes, a legal jargon that was meant to confuse and intimidate me. But I was not confused. I was not intimidated. I was filled with a cold, clear fury. The man who had abandoned me, the man who had stolen my money and my dignity, was now trying to take my home. The home I had poured my heart and soul into. The home where I had raised our children, where I had celebrated holidays, where I had spent a lifetime building a life that was now being torn apart. The phone rang. It was Sarah. "Mom," she said, her voice filled with a forced, fragile concern. "We heard about the lawsuit. Are you okay? Dad says he is just trying to be fair." My heart felt like a stone in my chest. "Fair?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "He has taken everything from me. He has taken my money, my reputation, my family. And now he wants my home. Is that what you call fair?" Sarah was silent for a moment. She did not have an answer. "He says he needs his money to start his new life," she said, her voice small. "He says it is for his happiness." I did not respond. Her words were a betrayal in and of themselves. She had chosen his happiness over my pain. She had chosen to believe the lie. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, the legal documents a heavy weight on my hands. But as I read through the legalese, a new thought began to take shape. This was not a moment of defeat. This was a moment of opportunity. He thought he was playing a game of legal maneuvers. He did not know that I was the one who had written the rules of the game. He thought he was playing against a tired old woman. He did not know he was playing against a ghost, a specter that had been watching his every move, his every breath. It was time to reveal my hand. I did not hire a lawyer. I did not need one. I was my own lawyer. I sat at my desk and I began to write. I wrote a letter to the court. I wrote a letter to my children. I wrote a letter to George and his lawyer. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a symphony of righteous indignation and cold, hard facts. I was not just a woman with a broken heart. I was a woman with a plan, a woman with a truth that was about to be revealed. I began my letter to the court with a simple, clear statement. "I am not fighting for this house out of sentimentality," I wrote. "I am fighting for this house because it is my home, and it is my home because I bought it. My husband's name is not on the deed because I bought it 2 years before we were married, and it was my sole property. I did not need a lawyer to tell me what to do. I had a lifetime of knowledge, a lifetime of quietly managing our affairs, and a lifetime of building a life for us. George, in his arrogance, had simply assumed he was a partner in all of it. He had never once bothered to look at the paperwork. He had simply trusted that I would take care of him, that I would manage our lives for him. And then, I began to reveal the truth about Jessica. I had worked for decades in a field that was so specialized, so secretive, that I had never even mentioned it to George. I was not just an executive. I was a pioneer in the world of data intelligence and corporate espionage. My company had built a special division that would hire young, tech-savvy operatives who would be embedded in rival companies to test their security. It was a secretive, dangerous, and highly profitable business. And I was the one who had created the division. I was the one who had hired and trained every single operative. And I was the one who had hired Jessica. Jessica was not just a neighbor. She was a plant. She was my employee. I had hired her to be our operative in a rival company. I had given her a new identity, a new life, and the ability to track every single move of her target. The target, I now realized, had become my husband. Jessica's job was to track him, to monitor his every move, his every breath. She was a digital ghost, a spy in plain sight. She was a loyal and effective employee. George did not know. He did not know that his new life, his new freedom, was a stage, and he was the star of my show. He did not know that his conversations with Jessica were being recorded. He did not know that his emails were being monitored. He did not know that his every financial transaction was being documented. He did not know that the woman he had abandoned, the woman he had dismissed as old, was watching his every move. In my letter to the court, I included a detailed report of George's every financial transaction since his departure. I had a digital copy of every receipt, every plane ticket, every dinner he had purchased with his share of our money. I had a digital trail of his every lie, his every betrayal. And then I included a final, chilling revelation. I had not just been watching his every move. I had been planning my revenge. The money he had taken from our joint account, which he had so arrogantly called his share, was a small portion of a much larger trust fund I had set up years ago for our children. He thought he had stolen a fortune. He had simply taken a small sum of money that was not his. He was a thief, but he was a stupid thief. He did not know that the real fortune, the one he was so desperate to get his hands on, was hidden in a secret account that was solely in my name. The account was filled with the money I had earned over my 40-year career, the money he had never even known about. The money was his. He just did not know it. The climax was now upon us. The story was no longer a tragedy of a woman abandoned. It was a story of a woman who had been betrayed, but who had turned her betrayal into a weapon. It was a story of a woman who had a plan, a woman who had a secret. The next chapter would be a confrontation, a reckoning. The next chapter would be a public and brutal unmasking of the man who had abandoned me, the man who had taken everything from me. The next chapter would be my triumph. The game, I knew, was almost over. And I was not going to lose. The day of the hearing arrived with a quiet, yet terrifying, finality. I walked into the courthouse, not as a victim, but as a warrior. My heart, which had been a stone for so long, was now a drum, beating a steady rhythm of righteous indignation. My mind, which had been a storm of pain, was now a razor, sharp and clear. I was not there to beg for justice. I was there to deliver it. The courtroom was sterile, a cold, impersonal space that was the perfect stage for the drama that was about to unfold. George sat on the other side of the room, his face a mask of arrogance and confidence. Jessica sat beside him, her hand on his arm, a sickly sweet smile on her face. They did not even bother to look at me. They saw me as a formality, an obstacle to be overcome. They did not know that I was the one who was about to deliver their final judgment. The hearing began. George's lawyer, a slick, young man with a condescending smirk, began to speak. He painted a picture of a man who had been trapped in a loveless marriage, a man who had been forced to leave to find his own happiness. He spoke of my incompetence and my inability to care for myself. He spoke of George's right to half of the equity in our home. He spoke of George's right to his freedom, his right to a new life. He spoke with a condescending tone, as if I were a child who was throwing a tantrum. I did not react. I simply sat there, my face a blank slate. And then it was my turn. My lawyer, a wise, old woman who had been a friend of my father's, began to speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not get angry. She simply began to lay out the truth. She began to speak about my career, a career that had been so successful, so secretive, that even George did not know about it. She spoke of my role in creating a cybersecurity and data intelligence firm. She spoke of my patents, my innovations, my brilliance. She spoke of a life that was so full of power and influence that it was a stark contrast to the small, insignificant life George had been leading. And then, she began to speak about Jessica. She spoke about Jessica's role in the company. She spoke about Jessica's assignment, her mission. She spoke about how Jessica had been a mole, a spy, an operative. She spoke about how Jessica had been reporting to me for years, providing me with detailed reports of a man's life, his movements, his secrets. She then revealed that Jessica's most recent assignment was George. She was not his lover. She was my employee. She was working for me. George's face, which had been so arrogant and confident just moments before, began to pale. He looked at Jessica, his eyes filled with a new, terrifying knowledge. Jessica's face, which had been so sweet and triumphant, was now a mask of pure terror. My lawyer then began to speak about the money. She spoke of the trust fund I had set up for our children, the one George had so arrogantly called his share. She spoke of the secret account, the one that held the real fortune, the one he had never even known about. She spoke of the money I had earned over my 40-year career, the money that was a testament to my life's work. The money that was now gone. Not gone from me, but gone from him. And then, she revealed the final, devastating truth. She spoke about the house. The house he was so desperate to get his hands on. The house he had so arrogantly claimed was his. My lawyer simply handed the judge a copy of the deed, a document that was a testament to my quiet strength, a document that proved that the house was mine. It had always been mine. It was purchased and paid for entirely by me before we were even married. George's name was not on the deed. It had never been on the deed. He had simply assumed it was. He had been living a lie for 42 years. George's face, which had been so full of arrogance and confidence just moments before, was now a complete and utter blank. He was no longer a man. He was a ghost, a specter of a life that he had never truly lived. He looked at me, and in his eyes, there was no anger, no hatred. There was simply a profound and utter shock. He had lost. He had lost everything. He had lost his money. He had lost his reputation. He had lost his life. The judge, a kind, old woman with a wise face, looked at him with a simple, yet powerful pity. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice filled with a quiet authority, "your lawsuit is dismissed." The words hung in the air, a final and brutal judgment. The world seemed to stop. The courtroom, which had been so loud just moments before, was now a place of complete and utter silence. George sat there, a broken man, a man who had lost everything. Jessica, his accomplice, was no longer a part of the show. She was simply a pawn that had been used, a pawn that had been discarded. I did not celebrate. I did not cheer. I simply stood there, a woman who had been betrayed, a woman who had been humiliated, but a woman who had won. The victory was not a victory of revenge. It was a victory of truth. It was a victory of dignity. It was a victory of a woman who had been underestimated, a woman who had been dismissed as old. It was a victory of a woman who had found her voice, a woman who had found her strength, a woman who had found her freedom. I walked out of the courthouse, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. The sun was shining. The air was crisp. The world felt new. The past was a memory. The future was a blank slate. I had a choice to make. I could have stayed in the courtroom and watched him suffer. I could have stayed and watched his downfall. But I did not. I simply walked away. The punishment was not just the loss of his money. The punishment was the knowledge that he had lost. The punishment was the knowledge that he was not the man he thought he was. The punishment was the knowledge that he had been played. And I was the one who had written the script. The final blow to George was not the verdict. It was the crushing silence that followed. The public, who had so eagerly consumed his narrative of a new, adventurous life, now turned on him. The legal documents I had submitted were a matter of public record, and within hours, his deception was exposed. The man who had been celebrated as a hero was now a cautionary tale, a subject of mockery and scorn. He and Jessica were ostracized, their new life of adventure and youth a lie that had been exposed for all to see. My children, who had been so easily swayed by their father's lies, came to me in a state of profound shame. They arrived at my home, their faces pale and drawn. Sarah and David apologized profusely, their words a torrent of remorse. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice choked with tears. "We are so sorry. We did not know. He told us you were not well. He told us you were the one who was holding everything up." I looked at them, my heart a mixture of love and pain. I knew they were not malicious. They were simply misguided. They had been manipulated by a man they had trusted, a man who was their father. "I am a grown woman," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I am responsible for my own choices. And so are you. You chose to believe him. You chose to abandon me. You have to live with that." My words were not a condemnation. They were a simple statement of fact. I was not going to give them an easy absolution. They needed to understand the consequences of their actions. They needed to understand that their choices had caused me pain, a pain that was not going to disappear overnight. In the days that followed, I was met with an endless stream of apologies. Friends, family, even old acquaintances, all came to my door, their voices filled with a newfound respect. They had seen the truth, and the truth had set me free. My life, which had been a public spectacle of humiliation, was now a testament to my quiet strength. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a conqueror, a woman who had taken a life that had been torn apart and had rebuilt it with her own two hands. I did not want to stay in the home I had shared with George. The house was a place of memories, a place of a life that was now over. I wanted a new beginning. I sold the house, but not for my own gain. I donated the proceeds to a local foundation that helped single, elderly women who had been victims of abuse or financial exploitation. It was a way of honoring the woman I had been, a way of giving back to the community that had given me so much. With the money from my secret account, I bought a small, beautiful home on a quiet street by the ocean. It was a home that was filled with light and warmth. It was a home that was a testament to my new life. It was a life that was free from the lies, free from the manipulation, free from the betrayal. I was not a woman who was defined by her past. I was a woman who was defined by her future. I did not hear from George. I did not want to. His life, I was told, was a miserable one. He was a man who had been cast out of his own life, a man who had lost everything. Jessica had left him, a testament to her own mercenary nature. She had found a new target, a new life to exploit. George, now alone and without a home, without a single friend, was a man who was haunted by his own choices. He had lost his money. He had lost his reputation. He had lost his family. He had lost everything that mattered. His punishment was not just financial ruin. It was the profound, aching loneliness of a man who had destroyed his own life. I, on the other hand, was a woman who was reborn. I found a new purpose in my life. I started a small consulting business, a business that helped other women navigate the complicated world of finance and technology. I became a mentor to young women who were just starting out in their careers. I became a speaker, a woman who spoke about the importance of independence, of strength, of courage. I became a woman who was not afraid to speak her mind. My life was a testament to my own strength. I was not a weak, old woman. I was a woman who had faced a challenge, a woman who had faced a betrayal, a woman who had faced a loss. And I had won. I had not won a battle. I had won a war. I had not won a prize. I had won my life. The final image of the story is of me, a few years later, sitting on my porch, a cup of tea in my hand, watching the sun set over the ocean. My heart was at peace. My mind was at rest. My life was my own. I was no longer defined by a man. I was no longer defined by a marriage. I was no longer defined by a betrayal. I was simply Martha. And that, I knew, was all I ever needed to be.